Welcome to the Tao at Night. Tonight we are sitting with a single image from the heart of Taoist teaching. A bamboo shoot emerging from hard, compacted earth. Not forcing its way through, not drilling or breaking, simply growing, patiently, continuously, in the direction it has always been going. And in growing, it passes through what all the rigid, brittle things above it could not. The soil that blocked the old growth gives way, not because the bamboo is stronger than the soil in the way we usually mean strength, but because it is more persistent, more patient. Lao Tzu made a distinction in the Tao Te Ching, known in the West as the Tao Te Ching, that cuts against what most of us were taught. He measured strength not by what resists, but by what continues. The stone resists mightily and is eventually worn to nothing. The water continues softly and eventually reaches the sea. The question is not what is stronger in the moment of impact. The question is what is still here when the long work is done. Softness is not the absence of strength. It is strength that has stopped fighting, that has found a more durable form of its own purpose. Tonight we will follow this teaching through 13 chapters, through 13 traditions, each of which has, in its own way and its own time, noticed the same thing, that the gentlest things in the world go further than the hardest. You do not need to know anything about Taoism to be here tonight. These teachings are for anyone who has ever exhausted themselves forcing what would not move, and wondered if there was something quieter and more enduring on the other side of the effort. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is, where you are listening from, and whether you are a front, back, or side sleeper. There are no wrong answers here, only fellow travelers finding their way to rest. So wherever you are right now, let yourself settle in. There is nothing to force tonight. The bamboo does not hurry, it simply continues. And what continues long enough arrives. Thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night. Let us begin. Lao Tzu wrote that the most soft thing in the world passes through the most hard. He was not speaking abstractly. He was observing something he had watched in actual water, actual plants, actual lives. The bamboo shoot does not know it is doing something remarkable. It simply does what bamboo does, grows. And in growing, in the most ordinary expression of its own nature, it passes through soil that would defeat any tool that tried to force it. Not because the bamboo is exceptional, because it is patient, because it does not stop. This is the first and most important dimension of the teaching. Softness is not passive. The bamboo is entirely active. It grows with everything it has, directed and purposeful, continuously. What it lacks is the quality we usually associate with force. The insistence on dramatic result now, the expenditure of maximum energy against the resistance in this moment. The bamboo does not fight the soil. It grows through it. These look similar from the outside. Both involve the bamboo passing through the earth. But from the inside, they are opposite. Fighting requires the soil's cooperation in being defeated. Growing requires nothing except time and the continuation of growth. For any mind that has ever encountered something it could not force, this teaching is not a consolation. It is a different way of understanding what strength actually is. The person who continues growing in the direction they have chosen, softly and without cease, is doing something the most dramatically forceful person cannot do. They are still going when the forceful approach has exhausted itself. This is what continues. This is what arrives. There was once a young mystic who could not find what she was looking for. She had been on the path of her tradition for several years, and she was not a casual practitioner. She prayed with great intensity. She fasted when fasting was prescribed and longer. She sat in contemplation until her body ached. And the thing she was looking for, the presence she had heard her teachers describe, the direct encounter with the divine that seemed to be the whole point of all this practice, had not arrived. She was not giving up, but she was frustrated in a way that was beginning to affect the practice itself. The intensity she was bringing to the search was changing the quality of the searching. She went to an elder in her community, a woman who was known for a very particular quality. She seemed to have found the thing the young mystic was looking for, and she seemed to carry it not as a dramatic achievement, but as something quiet and always present. "I am searching with everything I have," the young mystic said, "and I cannot find it." The elder listened. "What do you do when you search?" she asked. The young mystic described her practice, the intensity of the prayer, the quality of the focus, the sustained effort of the contemplation. The elder nodded slowly. "And in all of that searching," she said, "do you become still?" The young mystic thought about it. "Not exactly," she said. "I become very concentrated." "And concentration is not stillness," the elder said, gently, not as a correction. "No," the young mystic admitted. "Tell me," the elder said, "what does a fist know about what it holds?" The young mystic looked at her. She opened her hand slowly, then closed it again. "Nothing," she said. "The fist is pressing, not holding." "Yes," the elder said. "The fist exerts force on whatever is inside it. But force does not open the thing it is pressing. It only compresses it." She paused. "What you are looking for is not hiding from you. It is not eluding you by being cleverly located somewhere you have not yet searched. It is closer than that. But it cannot enter a fist." The young mystic sat with this for a long time. "So I am supposed to stop searching," she said finally. "I am asking you to search differently," the elder said, "not with the fist of effort, but with the open hand of attention. There is a difference between reaching out tightly and reaching out softly. Both are reaching, but only one can receive what it reaches toward." "And if I soften the search," the young mystic said, "won't I lose the discipline? Won't the practice become casual?" "The practice becomes more demanding," the elder said, with something that was almost a smile. "It is much easier to press hard than to be genuinely soft. Anyone can make a fist. Very few people can hold something valuable without gripping it." She looked at the young woman steadily. "The bamboo that grows through stone does not press. It grows, and it grows continuously, without intermission, directed always in the same direction. That is harder than pressing, because pressing is a single act. Growing is a lifetime. The young mystic returned to her practice with this image in mind. Not the fist, but the growing. Not the concentrated pressure, but the soft, continuous, directed presence. It was harder than what she had been doing, in the way the elder had described, requiring a sustained quality of openness rather than a burst of concentrated effort. The burst of effort felt from the inside like something was happening. The sustained softness felt at first like nothing was happening, which was its own difficulty. She had to learn to remain in the practice even when the practice did not feel like progress, even when the quality of it was simply quiet and unremarkable. She went back to the elder after the first month. "It feels like less," she said. "The intensity is gone. How do I know I'm still practicing and not simply sitting?" The elder considered this for a moment. "Can you feel the difference between sitting and practicing?" she asked. The young mystic thought. "Yes," she said, "there is a direction in the practice, something it is turned toward. When I am merely sitting, there is no direction." "Then you know," the elder said simply. "The direction is the practice. The intensity was never the practice. It was the feeling you were having about the practice." She carried this with her, and the thing she had been searching for did not arrive in a dramatic moment of encounter. It arrived gradually, the way warmth arrives in a room when a fire has been burning long enough. She could not say when it had come. She could only say that at some point she noticed it was there, and that it seemed, as she looked back, to have been there for some time already, waiting, perhaps, for the search to soften enough to receive it. In Sufi tradition, the concept the elder was pointing at has a specific name and a long history of teaching around it. Tawakkul, trust, surrender, the releasing of the grasping that prevents the divine from entering. The great Sufi teachers understood the spiritual path as paradoxical in precisely the way the elder described. The seeker who pursues the divine with great force of will and effort is, in a specific sense, the seeker who will not find, because what they are doing with their will is blocking the very opening through which the divine enters. The divine in the Sufi understanding is not located. It is allowed. It fills what is genuinely empty. Rumi's Masnavi returns to this teaching in dozens of images. The lover who holds so tightly destroys what they are holding. The disciple who insists on understanding before receiving understanding. The seeker who rushes past every encounter on the way to the encounter they are planning. In each case, the error is the same. Applying force where only openness can succeed. There is also in Sufi teaching the concept of baka, continuing, abiding, the quality of being present continuously rather than in bursts of effort. The mystic who practices in great concentrated peaks and valleys of effort is not the same as the mystic who maintains a continuous, soft, directed presence. The latter, in the Sufi understanding, is in a more reliable relationship with the divine, because the continuous, soft presence is always open, always available, never spending itself in the compressed exhaustion that follows peak effort. The bamboo grows continuously, not in bursts. The Sufi teaching on the spiritual life points at the same quality, not the great intensity of occasional effort, but the soft, continuous, directed persistence of genuine practice. Think about something you have been pursuing with maximum effort, and consider whether the effort itself is what has been preventing the arrival. This is not a universal prescription. Some things require sustained high effort, and there is nothing wrong with that. But there is a specific category of what we are looking for: understanding, connection, rest, the quality of genuine presence that cannot be obtained by force, can only be obtained by a quality of softness that makes receiving possible. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific futility of trying hard to fall asleep. The harder you try, the more alert the trying makes you. The sleep itself is trying to arrive. Your effort is the thing standing between you and it. It shows up in the trying hard to be happy, which produces, characteristically, a performance of happiness rather than the genuine thing, because the genuine thing requires a quality of openness that the trying has replaced with effort. You may have felt this yourself in the moment when something you had been pursuing with great intensity arrived only after you stopped pursuing it so hard. The memory that came in the walk rather than in the concentrated trying to remember, the creative solution that arrived in the shower rather than at the desk, the relationship connection that happened when you stopped trying to make a good impression. Right now, in this breath, there is nothing to pursue and nothing to force. The softness of this moment is the bamboo's softness, not weakness, not the absence of direction, but the quality that allows what is already growing to continue growing without interference. Something in you is already moving toward rest. You do not need to force it. You only need to stop pressing. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote about patience not as a virtue in the moral sense, the way patience is often praised as something admirable in itself, but as a practical quality of the most effective engagement with the world. The patient person is not slower than the impatient one. They arrive at the same place and find that the impatient one has exhausted themselves trying to get there faster and has accomplished less along the way. This is the bamboo's patience, not the patience of waiting, but the patience of growing. The bamboo does not pause while the soil is hard. It continues. The patience is expressed not in stillness, but in the quality of the ongoing movement, unhurried, undramatic, unbroken. For the craftsperson, this teaching appears in the relationship between the work and the material. Some materials respond to force. Wood can be split with force, stone can be cut with it, but other processes, the curing of leather, the tempering of metal, the fermentation that produces something worth eating or drinking, cannot be forced. They proceed at their own pace, governed by the chemical and biological reality of what they are. And the craftsperson who understands this works with the pace rather than against it. The worst outcomes in these processes come from impatience. Leather scraped too hard, metal quenched too fast, fermentation hurried into spoilage. The best outcomes come from the patience that trusts the process to proceed at the pace it needs, and that maintains the right conditions without pressing for an outcome before the conditions have produced it. Softness in these processes is not weakness. It is the accurate reading of what the work requires. There was once a young person learning to prepare hides. She had been taken on as an apprentice by a woman who had been working leather for most of her adult life. The elder's work was known throughout the region. Soft, durable, with a particular quality of workmanship that her students tried to understand and almost never successfully reproduced, at least not quickly. The young apprentice was willing. She was also strong, and she applied her strength to the work in the way she had applied it to everything else she had learned, fully and with the confidence that more effort would produce better results. The first sign of difficulty came when she was learning to scrape. The scraping of a hide, the removal of fat and membrane from the inner surface, required a firm, sustained movement of the scraping tool across the surface. Done correctly, it produced a clean, even surface. Done incorrectly, it left marks, or worse, cut through the hide itself. The young apprentice scraped firmly. She scraped with the confidence of someone who knew that good work required effort, and the hide she was working on began to show unevenness, then thin spots, then a small tear. The elder watched. She did not intervene immediately. When the young apprentice looked up, the elder asked her to set the scraper down. "Show me your hands," the elder said. She looked at her hands. They were tight on the scraper, had been tight the whole time, she realized. "Feel how much effort you are using," the elder said. "Feel the tension." She felt it. The effort was considerable. "Now," the elder said, "pick up the scraper again. Hold it the way you would hold something valuable that you did not want to damage." She picked it up more gently. The whole quality of her grip changed. "Move it across the hide," the elder said. "Not scraping, listening." "Listening," she said, "to what the hide is telling you about what it needs. You were telling the hide what to do. I'm asking you to let the hide tell you." She paused. "The hide is not uniform. It is thicker here, thinner there, more resistant in places, more ready to release in others. The scraper held tightly cannot feel this. It is pressing uniformly against what is not uniform. The scraper held softly can feel the variations and respond to them." She tried it. The softer grip and slower pace did feel different. She could feel, faintly, the variations in the hide's resistance, a place where the membrane held more firmly, a place where it was almost ready to release. She found herself slowing in the resistant places, not pressing harder against them, and moving with a little more ease in the places that were ready. The hide she completed that morning was better than anything she had made in the weeks before, not because she had used more effort, because she had used the right amount of effort in each place, responding to what the material was telling her, rather than applying uniform force throughout. "Did you feel the difference?" the elder asked when she looked up. "It felt like less work," she said. "But the result is better." "Yes," the elder said. "The work that accomplishes more usually feels like less, because it is not spending energy on fighting what it could be working with." She picked up a piece of the elder's own finished leather, supple, even, without visible marks. This did not come from pressing harder. It came from pressing the right amount in the right place at the right time, which is what listening to the material tells you. The young apprentice spent the rest of that season relearning everything she had been doing with tight hands. It was humbling. But the work that emerged from the relearning was different in quality from everything before it, and the difference was entirely in the grip. In Lakota tradition, the understanding of the relationship between the craftsperson and their material is expressed through the teaching that every material has its own wakan, its own sacred quality, its own kind of aliveness, and that the craftsperson who honors this quality works in harmony with it rather than against it. The Lakota practice of working with animal hides, central to the making of clothing, shelter, and ceremonial items, was understood as a relationship rather than a transaction. The hide was not merely raw material to be processed, it was the gift of an animal that had given its life, and it carried within it the animal's own qualities, which the craftsperson's skill was meant to express rather than override. This understanding produced a specific quality of attention in the work. The Lakota tanner was trained to read the hide, to feel its variations, to understand where it was thick and where it was thin, where it was ready to work and where it needed more time, with exactly the quality the elder was teaching, not uniform force but responsive engagement. There is also in Lakota craft tradition the concept of the right time for each part of the work. Not every hide was ready on the same schedule. Not every stage of the preparation was done in the same sequence for every piece. The skilled worker read the material's readiness and worked with it, rather than imposing a fixed schedule. The patience of this approach was not laziness, it was accuracy. The young apprentice's lesson that softer listening reaches further than harder pressing is this Lakota teaching in its practical form. The material has something to tell the maker. The maker who is pressing too hard cannot hear it. Think about the last time you produced your best work and consider how much effort it required. The answer is often surprising. The best work rarely comes from maximum effort. It comes from the right effort, the amount that is in genuine relationship with what the work requires, rather than the amount that demonstrates your commitment to it. This distinction matters. Effort as demonstration, the effort that proves you care, that shows you are serious, that responds to the internal pressure that says you must work harder, is the tight-handed grip. It is effort pressed uniformly against a material that is not uniform, and the result is the uneven hide with the thin spots. Effort as response, the effort that reads what the work requires and offers exactly that, is the soft grip that can feel the variations. It is more efficient not because it is easier, but because it is accurate. Nothing is spent on fighting what could be worked with. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific difference between the conversation held in urgency and the one held in genuine attention. Both take time. The urgent one often produces nothing and damages the relationship while failing. The attentive one produces more in less time because it is reading what is actually there rather than pressing against it. You may have felt this yourself in the quality of a day when you worked with something rather than against it, when the resistance that usually costs you so much was somehow absent, and the work moved with an ease that you later found hard to explain to yourself. Right now, in this breath, the grip can soften. There is nothing here to scrape, only the night which is entirely ready to be received. The material is prepared. The work of tonight is only to let your hands open. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote about the soft word that reaches what the argument cannot. This teaching has a specific and verifiable quality to it. Not a philosophical claim, but an observation that anyone who has ever been in a difficult conversation can verify for themselves. The argument that presses for a particular conclusion tends to produce resistance in the person it is pressed against. The resistance is not always conscious. It arises from the nature of pressure. When something presses on us, we press back. The back pressing may be subtle, a slight closing of the body, a tightening of the expression, a quality of listening that has shifted from receiving to defending, but it is real, and it means that the argument, however good, is meeting a self that is now protecting rather than opening. The soft word does not produce this back-pressing. It arrives gently enough that the person on the other side has nothing to push against, and in having nothing to push against, they remain open. The openness allows the thing being said to actually land, to enter and be considered, rather than to be deflected. This is the bamboo teaching in language, the thing that grows softly through what force cannot move. The rigid argument tries to break the resistance. The soft word finds the space where resistance is not required, and in that space it grows. The Stoics understood this from a different direction and arrived at the same recognition that genuine persuasion is not the application of force, but the creation of conditions in which the other person can see something new. There was once a student who could not persuade a difficult teacher. He was studying at an institution known for the rigor of its standards and the uncompromising nature of its senior faculty. One teacher in particular had a reputation that was the subject of much discussion among the students. She was brilliant, severe, and had been teaching long enough that she had heard every argument students could make and had found each one wanting, in ways she was entirely willing to explain. The student had a genuine point to make. He had been working on a problem for several months and had arrived at a conclusion that he believed was correct and that he knew contradicted this teacher's published position. He was not wrong in believing his conclusion was correct. His reasoning was sound and had been checked by others. But every time he attempted to make his case, she closed it. Not rudely, not with contempt. She simply had at her disposal an enormous number of ways of showing why the current version of his argument was insufficient, and she deployed them without hesitation. He would leave each session feeling that he had failed, and he would return with a more refined version of the argument, and she would find the next weakness. The session after that would produce a still more refined version, but no closer to her actually hearing the core of what he was saying. An older student who had been at the institution longer watched this cycle with some recognition. "You are pressing," the older student said. "I am making an argument," the young student said. "You are making an argument the way you press a bruise," the older student said. "With force, against the exact place that is already most defended. Each time you come in with a refined argument, you are demonstrating to her that you are in contest with her published position, and she is very good at contests. "What is the alternative?" the young student asked. "My reasoning is correct." "Then the question is not whether your reasoning is correct," the older student said. "The question is what kind of conversation would allow her to see that, not the conversation where she must defend her position against your attack. A different kind of conversation." He paused. "Have you asked her what she finds most interesting about the problem?" The young student considered this. He had not. He had been making his case. "If you ask what she finds interesting," the older student said, "you will hear where her thinking actually lives on this question. Not the published position, which is already defended, but the live thinking underneath it. And the live thinking may be much closer to your conclusion than the published position. You won't know until you ask." He asked the following week, not his argument, her interest. The conversation that followed was entirely different from every previous one. She was not in the defended space of the published position. She was in the genuinely open space of what she was still wondering about. And what she was still wondering about was very close, it turned out, to the territory his conclusion occupied. She did not concede his point that day, but she listened to it, actually listened to it for the first time. And 2 weeks later, she mentioned it in a seminar, not as his point, but as a point worth considering, which was, in her vocabulary, a form of acknowledgement he had never expected to receive. He had not pressed it through. He had found the space where it could grow. Stoic philosophy developed a formal understanding of why the soft word reaches what argument cannot, rooted in its analysis of how genuine change in a person occurs. The Stoics observed that people change their minds not when they are defeated in argument, which tends to produce resentment and a determined return to the original position once the argumentation has ended, but when they see something new. And seeing something new requires being genuinely open, which requires not being in the defensive posture that argument tends to produce. Epictetus taught that you cannot force someone to see what they are not yet ready to see. What you can do is create the conditions in which they might be ready, and those conditions are almost always relational rather than argumentative. Warmth, genuine curiosity about the other person's thinking, a willingness to be surprised by them, the removal of the threat of being defeated. Marcus Aurelius applied this in his political life, a life that required him to deal with senators, generals, and rivals who had strongly held and often incorrect positions. He returned repeatedly in his journals to the principle of meeting people where they actually were, rather than where he wanted them to be. The argument that meets a person where they actually are has a chance of moving them. The argument that meets them where they are not is pushing against air. There is also in Stoic philosophy the concept of the logos spermatikos, the generative word, the word that plants a seed rather than bludgeons a position. The student's shift from arguing his case to asking the teacher's genuine thinking was the move from the blunt argument to the logos spermatikos. He planted something in a space that was genuinely open, and it grew. Think about a conversation you have been pressing in the wrong way. Not a conversation where the pressing is wrong because you are wrong, a conversation where you may well be right, and where the pressing itself has become the obstacle to your rightness being received. Where the argument that could be heard has been made in a form that cannot be heard because the form is defending rather than opening. What is the open space in that conversation? Not the defended position of the other person, but the thing they are still genuinely wondering about, the live thinking underneath the published position. That is where the soft word finds its way through. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific failure mode of being right in the wrong way, where you win the argument and lose the relationship, or win the argument and the other person simply returns to their position the moment you stop pressing, because they were never actually persuaded, only temporarily overwhelmed. You may have felt this yourself in the conversation that changed something, not because someone was convinced by your argument, but because you asked a question they hadn't expected, and the question opened something, and what they said in response moved them further toward your position than any argument would have. Right now, in this breath, there are no arguments to make. The night has no position to defend. Whatever has been pressing in you today, the need to be heard, the need to be right, the need to convince someone of something, it can rest. The soft word is already spoken. The seed is already planted. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. The Tao Te Ching contains an image that appears deceptively simple: the uncarved block. The wood before the shape has been decided, before the carving has begun, in the state of maximum possibility. Lao Tzu called this pu, a state of original simplicity and completeness, before the insistence on a particular form has reduced the material's possibilities to a specific one. This teaching connects to the bamboo's teaching in an unexpected way. The bamboo shoot emerging from the earth has not yet decided what a bamboo is. It simply grows in the direction its nature takes it. It is not trying to be a particular kind of bamboo. It is being bamboo completely in the form this particular moment and this particular soil and this particular season produce. The quality of pu, the uncarved block, is the quality of not forcing a predetermined form onto the living process. The bamboo allowed to grow according to its own nature will be more completely bamboo than the bamboo forced into a shape chosen in advance. The child allowed to develop according to their own deepest nature will be more completely themselves than the child shaped to fit a predetermined form. This is a teaching about gentleness toward what is growing. The gentle approach does not impose its idea of what the growing thing should become. It creates the conditions, light, water, space, attention, and trusts the growing thing to become what it is. In human terms, this is the teaching of the wise teacher, not the one who produces students in their own image, but the one who creates the conditions in which each student becomes more completely themselves. There was once a teacher of weaving who gave the same first lesson to every student. She taught at a loom that had been her mother's, and her mother's mother's before that. The loom was large and complex, and the first time any student sat before it, they tended to feel overwhelmed by the number of elements that needed to be managed simultaneously. The warp threads held under tension, the shuttle carrying the weft thread through, the beater pressing each new row of weft into the growing cloth. The common error of beginning students was to grip. The shuttle, the warp threads, the beater, all were held with more force than was needed, in an effort to control the process that felt, initially, very much out of control. The teacher's first lesson was always the same. She would ask the student to thread the shuttle with a new length of yarn. Threading a shuttle is a simple task. The yarn passes through a small eye in the shuttle, but it requires the yarn to be soft enough to pass through smoothly. A yarn held tensely, twisted, kinked, pulled taut, will not thread easily. A yarn held loosely, allowed to find its own drape, threads almost by itself. Thread it again, she would say each time a student struggled. And when they struggled again, she would ask them to show her their hands. Always the hands were tight. The fingers were pressing the yarn rather than holding it. Put it down, she would say. Now pick it up as though it is something alive that you do not want to hurt. The quality of the grip changed immediately when she said this, and the threading happened almost immediately after. The whole weaving is like this, she said. The thread that is held tightly tangles, breaks, catches. The thread held softly finds its own path through. Your work is not to control the thread. It is to give the thread what it needs to move. One student pushed back. But isn't weaving about controlling what happens? The student said. The design, the pattern, those have to be decided. I have to know where the thread is going. You decide the design, the teacher agreed. The pattern is yours. But the thread going to the right place according to the pattern is not accomplished by gripping. It is accomplished by giving the thread the right conditions, the right tension on the warp, the right angle of entry, the right beat. Within those conditions, the thread places itself. So the weaver controls the conditions but not the thread? The weaver tends the conditions, she said, gently correcting the word. Tending is not controlling. Tending is maintaining the conditions in which the thread can do what it does naturally, which is to lie where it is placed if the conditions are right for lying there. The student who pushed back turned out to be one of the best weavers she ever trained. Not because the pushing back was wrong, it asked the right question, but because the answer changed the whole relationship the student had with the work. Not control, tending, not force, conditions. The cloth that emerged from tended conditions had a quality that the cloth produced by gripping did not, a particular evenness, a drape, a way of lying. You could see in the finished cloth the quality of the hands that had made it. In Hindu philosophy, the concept of ahimsa, non-harming, non-violence, is usually understood in the ethical sense, the commitment not to cause unnecessary suffering to living beings. But in the context of craft, learning, and the shaping of growing things, ahimsa carries a more subtle meaning, the commitment not to impose more force than the situation requires. The weaver's tending of the conditions is ahimsa in practice. The teacher who creates conditions rather than imposes forms is practicing ahimsa toward the student's own developing nature. The parent who holds the child's growth with open hands rather than a shaping grip is practicing ahimsa toward the child's svadharma, their own particular path and purpose. Hindu teaching on svadharma is relevant here. Each being has its own dharma, its own nature and purpose, which is unique and which cannot be correctly substituted by another being's dharma, however excellent. The student who becomes a copy of the teacher has not developed their own svadharma. The child who becomes the parent's ideal has not yet been allowed to find theirs. The uncarved block's teaching in Hindu terms is that the block already contains the form it is meant to take, that the carving is the revelation of what was already there, not the imposition of what was not. The sensitive carver reads the wood for the form the wood itself inclines toward. The sensitive teacher reads the student for the understanding the student is already reaching toward. The tending, the light, the water, the space, the attention serves what is already growing rather than replacing it with what the tender had decided in advance. Think about something you are growing or something you are trying to help grow, and whether you have been tending it or gripping it. A relationship, a creative project, a skill, a child, or a person you mentor. Something that has its own nature and its own direction of growth, and that you have been trying to shape into a form you decided in advance. The question is not whether you have a vision for how it might develop. Visions are useful. The question is whether the vision has become a grip, whether you are pressing the growth toward a predetermined form rather than creating the conditions in which the growth can express its own direction. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific frustration of watching something you care about resist your best efforts to improve it. The relationship that gets further from what you want, the harder you try to shape it. The creative project that loses its life every time you try to edit it into something better. The student who becomes more blocked, the more intensely you teach. You may have felt this yourself in the moment when you stopped trying to make something be what you wanted it to be, and it became more itself, which turned out to be better than what you had been pressing it toward. Right now, in this breath, the tending of tonight requires nothing from you. The conditions are present. The night, the breath, the warmth. Your body knows what to do with these conditions. You do not need to tend the sleep. You only need to stop pressing the thread. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote that the sage does not seek to fill the world with their knowledge, that they know without traveling, see without looking, accomplish without acting. This sounds impossible until you understand what he meant by knowing, seeing, and accomplishing. The knowing he was describing is not the knowing of accumulated facts. It is the knowing of genuine understanding, the kind that grows in a person the way a seed grows, not by being installed, but by finding the conditions in which growth is possible, and then continuing without ceremony until one day the person realizes they understand something they did not understand before, and cannot say exactly when the understanding arrived. This is the bamboo's way of knowing. The bamboo does not learn the soil. It grows through the soil, and in growing through it, comes to know it, not as a list of soil properties, but as the lived experience of what this particular earth required of this particular growth, at this particular depth and season. Understanding that arrives this way, through patient, continuing, soft-handed engagement, is different from understanding that is pressed in. It has roots. It connects to other things. It is available not just as a fact to be retrieved, but as a way of seeing that changes what you notice. The teaching for those who are trying to understand something difficult is the bamboo teaching. Do not press for the understanding. Create the conditions in which the understanding can grow. Provide it with exposure, with questions, with patient return, and wait, with the faith that what continues growing will eventually arrive at what it is moving toward. There was once a novice who could not understand a teaching. It was not a simple teaching. The tradition he was part of held some of its deepest insights in forms that required years of practice before they became genuinely accessible. His teacher had given him a text to work with, short, spare, and apparently simple. But the more he worked with it, the more he felt that the obvious reading was not the real one, and the real one was not accessible to him. He worked at it the way he worked at everything, methodically, intensively, with the focus and discipline that had brought him this far in the practice. He read the text every day. He read commentaries on it. He discussed it with other students. He brought the same questions to his teacher week after week, hoping that the questions would eventually unlock the thing he could not reach. The teacher observed this for several months before speaking to it directly. "What do you do after you read the text?" the teacher asked. The novice described his note-taking, his commentary reading, his discussion practice. "After all of that," the teacher said, "what do you do then?" He thought about it. "Move on to the next stage of the day's practice," he said. "You do not sit with it?" "I sit with it during the reading," the novice said. "Sitting with it during the reading is still reading," the teacher said. "I am asking whether you allow the text to work in you after you have stopped actively working at it." The novice was not sure he understood the distinction. "A seed planted in soil," the teacher said, "does not grow while you are actively planting it. It grows after you have covered it and walked away. The planting is necessary. Without it nothing grows. But the planting is not the growing. The growing happens in the quiet after the planting." "So I should do nothing with it?" "You should provide the right conditions," the teacher said. "Then allow the growing to happen without your management of it." She looked at him. "You have been managing the growing. You have been returning to the planted seed every day, uncovering it, examining it, looking for signs of growth, covering it again. This is understandable. It is also interfering with the growing." He sat with this. "But if I stop working at it," he said, "won't I lose the connection to it?" "You will lose the performance of connection," the teacher said gently, "which is not the same as the connection itself. The student who works intensively at understanding and produces note after note of their engagement with the text is performing understanding. The student who plants the text and walks away and returns months later to find that they now see what they could not see before, that student has understood. She paused. The understanding is the thing that grows in the quiet. The novice tried this. It was harder than working intensively, because working intensively felt like progress, and not working intensively felt like neglect. The days when he did not return to the text with notes and questions felt for a long time like failures of commitment. He had to hold the distinction the teacher had offered him against the feeling that he was abandoning what he cared about. But he continued. He read the text. He sat. He did not pursue. After about 2 months, something happened that he had not expected. A question he had been unable to formulate during the months of active working arose, naturally, during an entirely unrelated conversation. Not because the conversation was relevant, it was not. But the question arrived as though it had been waiting patiently for the moment when there was enough quiet to speak. He wrote the question down. He brought it to the teacher. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "It was just there. That," she said, "is the growing." She looked at the question he had written. "This question could not have been asked when you were pressing at the text. It requires an understanding that the pressing was preventing. Now that the pressing has made room, the understanding has produced what it has been producing, which is the right question." "So I am still at the question stage," he said, somewhat deflated. "You have arrived at the first genuine question," she said, "which is entirely different from all the questions you were asking before. Before, you were asking because you were pressing for answers. This question arose because something in you actually knows enough to want to know more." She handed the paper back. "This is the question that will lead somewhere. The previous ones were leading around the same small circle." He worked with the question for another 4 months in the same way, with patience, without pressing. And 6 months after first trying the teacher's suggestion, he returned to the text and found that he was reading something he had not been able to read before. Not different words, the same words, but they had a different quality now. They seemed to carry something they had not carried when he was pressing at them. The understanding was there, in the reading, in a way it had not been. He could not have said when it had arrived, only that it had, and that it arrived during the walking away, not despite the walking away, because of it. Buddhist teaching on learning and understanding holds at its center a distinction that is directly relevant to the novice's experience. The difference between pariyatti, patipatti, and pativida, knowing the teaching, practicing the teaching, and realizing the teaching. The three are sequential but not controllable. You can pursue pariyatti, the knowing of the teaching, through study. You can pursue patipatti, the practice of the teaching, through meditation, ethics, and the ongoing attention to how you live. But pativida, the realization of the teaching, the moment when it is genuinely understood from the inside, cannot be pursued directly. It arrives as a consequence of the first two, in its own time, in the way that the bamboo arrives at the surface in its own time after the conditions have been maintained long enough. Buddhist teachers also speak of virya, energy, effort as one of the factors of awakening, but the teaching is specific about the quality of virya that is useful. It is not straining effort, not the forced pressing of the student at the text. It is the sustained, continuous, unhurried energy of the practitioner who keeps practicing without requiring the results to arrive on their schedule. This is the bamboo energy, not explosive, not straining, but present at every moment of the growing, never absent, never resting, and therefore eventually arriving at what the straining approach never reaches. There is also in Buddhist teaching the concept of upekkha, equanimity, the quality of being equally present to whatever is arising, without grasping after pleasant states or pushing away difficult ones. The student practicing upekkha with the text they cannot understand does not panic about not understanding, does not press harder in response to the frustration, and does not give up. They maintain the conditions. They continue. The understanding arrives in its own season. Think about something you are trying to understand that has not yet yielded to your best efforts. Not something that genuinely requires more study. Perhaps it does. But beneath the studying, is there a quality of pressing that might be working against the understanding itself? A management of the growing, a constant examination of the seed, an impatience with the pace at which the thing you are trying to understand is willing to become clear. Understanding that feels forced, rarely feels fully yours. You can pass the test and not understand the material. You can recite the argument and not grasp what it is actually pointing at. The understanding that is truly yours, the understanding that changes how you see, that is available to you not just in the moment of recitation, but in the middle of an unrelated experience weeks later. That understanding grew in the quiet. It arrived after the active work, in the walking away. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific experience of suddenly understanding something you had been studying for months, not in a study session, but in a completely different context, doing something else entirely, when the thing you had been pressing at finally surfaced in your awareness as clear and simple and obvious. You may have felt this yourself in the way that a complex technical concept you had been wrestling with became transparent while you were walking or cooking or falling asleep, as though the understanding had been waiting for you to stop pressing at it so it could rise to the surface. Right now, in this breath, you are in the walking away. The study session is over. Whatever you have been working to understand, you can let it rest now, in the quiet where the growing actually happens. The seed is planted. The conditions are good. What continues in the dark does not require your management of it. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote about the power of constancy, of the quality that simply does not stop. The valley, he said, is eternal because it does not strive. The spirit of the valley does not run dry because it does not exhaust itself in effort. It endures through its own unhurried, unbroken presence. This is the bamboo's quality taken to its most philosophical expression, The strength of what continues is not the strength of what wins. It is something quieter and more durable. The winning requires a peak, a moment of superior force meeting inferior force. The continuing requires only that the thing itself not stop, and not stopping in the face of the difficulty is its own form of power, one that cannot be directly defeated because it does not stand still long enough to be a target. The young scholar who cannot move the stubborn elder through argument may be able to move them through presence, through the quiet, sustained, genuine interest that eventually makes the elder genuinely interested in return. Not because the presence is a strategy, but because genuine presence maintained over time changes the quality of a relationship in ways that no single act can. The Hasidic teachers were acute observers of this quality. They called it avodah, service, the patient, sustained attention to the holy that, maintained over years, produces a quality of soul that no single dramatic act of devotion could create. The bamboo of the spiritual life. There was once a young man who wanted to change an elder's mind. The elder was someone of considerable standing in the young man's community, respected, experienced, and possessed of opinions that were, in the young man's genuine assessment, wrong on a matter that was important. The young man had the evidence and the reasoning on his side, but the elder was not persuaded. He had tried the direct approach. He had tried the indirect approach. He had tried bringing in supporting arguments from authorities the elder respected. He had tried acknowledging the legitimate parts of the elder's position before presenting his own. None of it had moved the needle more than slightly, and what slight movement had occurred seemed to revert between conversations. He came to a teacher in his community who was known for a particular kind of wisdom. Not book learning, but the learning that comes from having lived carefully and observed much. "The elder won't hear me," the young man said. "Does the elder know you?" the teacher asked. The young man thought about this. "He knows who I am," he said. "That is different from knowing you," the teacher said. "Tell me, when you speak with this elder, what do you speak about?" "The matter on which I am trying to persuade him," the young man said. "And other things?" He paused. "Mostly the matter." "So to this elder," the teacher said, "you are primarily a source of arguments against his position." The young man saw where this was going, but waited. "Arguments that come from a stranger carry the weight of the arguments," the teacher said. "Arguments that come from a person who is genuinely known carry the weight of the relationship behind them. The elder may be wrong, I do not know the matter, but he is not stupid, and he knows that a stranger's arguments serve the stranger's purposes. He does not yet know what purposes you serve." She paused. "Before you can change his mind, he must know enough of yours to trust that your argument is not merely convenient." "How long does that take?" the young man asked. "It takes as long as it takes," she said. "You cannot schedule it. You can only show up, not to persuade, but to be present in a way that lets him discover who you actually are. Ask him about his work, his history, the things he has learned, not to find openings for your argument, to genuinely learn what he knows." She looked at the young man directly. "If you go in with an agenda, he will feel the agenda. If you go in with genuine curiosity, he will feel that too." The young man tried this. He visited the elder without an argument. He asked about the elders' history with the question they had been disagreeing about, not to find the weak point, but because he found, to his surprise, that the history was genuinely interesting. The elder had arrived at his position through experiences the young man had not known about. Some of those experiences made the position more understandable than it had seemed from the outside. The young man also found, in this changed quality of conversation, that his own position was slightly different from what he had been arguing. He had been arguing the strong version, the version easiest to defend. The actual position, fully held, had some of the elder's concerns inside it. The conversation that emerged from this discovery was genuinely different from the previous ones. Not a victory, not even a resolution, but a mutual recognition that the truth was probably between their positions, and that neither of them had fully arrived at it, and that the conversation was not over. This was not what the young man had come for, but it was, he gradually understood, more than he had been capable of before he stopped pressing. Hasidic teaching on the relationship between the self and the holy, between the person and the divine, is built around this quality of patient, sustained presence that the young man discovered inadvertently. The concept is devikut, cleaving, attachment, the continuous quality of connection that is maintained not through dramatic acts of piety, but through the ordinary, sustained, unhurried attention of a life turned toward what matters. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, taught that devekut was accessible to every person in every circumstance. Not only in moments of prayer or study, but in the act of eating, working, speaking, resting. The whole of life could be an act of connection if the quality of attention was continuous and genuine. This is the bamboo teaching applied to the spiritual life, not the dramatic peak of a single great devotional act, but the continuous, unhurried, soft-handed growth of a life that never entirely stops moving toward what it is moving toward. There is also in Hasidic teaching the concept of anava, humility, the quality of not insisting on your own centrality, not requiring the conversation to serve your agenda, being genuinely other-directed rather than self-directed. This is precisely what the teacher was asking the young man to find in his relationship with the elder, not the humility of self-deprecation, but the genuine other-directedness of someone who is actually curious about the other person and not merely hunting for an opening. The young man's discovery, that genuine curiosity, changed the quality of the conversation more than any argument could, was the anava teaching in action. The soft-handed question reaches where the tight-fisted argument cannot. Think about a relationship in your life where you have been showing up primarily as a source of your own agenda. Not with bad intentions, with good ones. You want to help, persuade, improve, change something that should be changed. The agenda is reasonable, but because it is always present, the other person can feel it, and what they feel is the agenda rather than you. And the agenda produces in them the same mild defensiveness that the young man's arguments produced in the elder. A slight closing, a slight preparedness to hear the next version of the case that is being made. What would it mean to show up without the agenda, even once? to be genuinely curious about the other person's experience of the matter, not as a tactical move, but as an actual interest in what they know and how they came to know it. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific experience of discovering, in a conversation freed from agenda, that the other person understood something you had been missing. Something that did not defeat your position, but that complicated it in ways that, had you known, would have made your engagement with the question more honest and more complete. You may have felt this yourself in the particular warmth of being genuinely listened to, not interrogated, not nudged toward a conclusion, but actually heard. And the way this warmth made you more willing to consider the listener's perspective than any argument would have. Right now, in this breath, there is no agenda. Nothing to convince the night of, nothing the night needs to understand about you. The presence of tonight is its own complete quality. Let it be that. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. There is a quality in the teaching of Wu Wei, the principle of acting without forcing, of the action that arises from genuine alignment with the situation rather than from the will's insistence on a particular outcome, that is easiest to understand in creative work, the circle drawn without trying to draw a perfect circle. The line that arrives from a relaxed and practiced hand, the melody that comes when the musician stops thinking about the melody and begins to play. In each case, the thing that was being pressed toward becomes available only when the pressing is released. This is not mystery. It is the natural behavior of skills that have been genuinely practiced. The skill lives in the body, in the accumulated experience of many repetitions. When the conscious mind steps aside, when the trying to do stops and the doing begins, the skill can express itself without interference, and what it expresses is often better than anything the conscious trying could have produced. The bamboo again, it does not try to grow, it grows, and that growing, because it is genuine rather than performed, produces what no performance of growing could. For the Zen calligraphy tradition, this is the central teaching and the central practice. The cultivation of skill through years of repetition, followed by the releasing of that skill into expression without management. The student who can draw the perfect circle is not the one who has learned to control the brush with maximum precision. It is the one who has practiced enough that the brush can move without the mind's supervision, and who has learned to step aside and let it. There was once a student of the brush who could not make a circle. This is a well-worn practice in certain traditions of calligraphy and painting. The circle, called enso, is one of the most revealing things a practitioner can attempt. A circle is simple to describe and almost impossible to produce with the qualities that mark a genuine one. The aliveness, the completeness, the sense that it was made in one breath by someone fully present. The student had been practicing other strokes for several years with good results. Her lines were clean, her characters were well formed, her control of ink and brush was genuinely accomplished. But the circle defeated her. Every attempt produced something that looked like a circle had been carefully constructed rather than drawn. Competent, but not alive. Her teacher watched her attempts without commenting for a long time. One afternoon, the teacher asked her, "What are you trying to produce?" "A perfect circle," the student said. "Describe what you mean by perfect." She described the qualities she was reaching for: completeness, evenness, the quality of a single continuous movement. "And when you make the stroke," the teacher said, "are you making it, or are you watching yourself make it?" She thought about this. Both, she realized. She was making the stroke and simultaneously observing whether the stroke was achieving the qualities she was describing. "That is two things," the teacher said, "the making and the watching. And when you are watching, who is making?" She saw the problem immediately. "No one," she said, or "no one is fully making. Part of my attention is already evaluating." "So the stroke is divided," the teacher said. "Part making, part assessing. And the assessment is continuous. It begins before the stroke is complete. So the stroke is always responding not to what it is doing, but to what the assessment is finding." "And the assessment finds it wanting," the student said slowly. "And the stroke tries to correct, and the correction is observed by the assessment, and—" "The circle never closes," the teacher said, "because the stroke is always catching up to the gap the assessment has identified." She looked at her brush. "What is the solution?" she asked. "Practice until the circle is so thoroughly in your body that making it requires no watching," the teacher said, "and then make it without watching." She paused. "But you have been making it with watching for so long that the watching has become part of how you make it. So we must first separate them." She gave the student a practice that seemed odd. She asked her to make circles without looking at the paper. Eyes closed, brush moving, the circle completed in one breath, and only then the eyes opened to see what had arrived. The circles made without watching were strange, not the controlled, worked quality of the previous attempts, but something rawer and more various. Some were genuinely alive in ways the controlled ones were not. Some were simply imprecise. "This is the skill without the watching," the teacher said. "Now your work is to practice until the unwatched skill is also accurate. At that point, you can open your eyes, and the watching will be allowed in, but only as a witness, not a director." The student practiced both ways for the next year. It was slow because the habit of watching was strong and kept returning, but gradually the circle became available without the watching, and when the watching was allowed back in, as witness rather than director, the circle that arrived in the watching's presence was genuinely different from what she had been making before. Zen teaching holds this distinction between the skill as managed and the skill as expressed as central to the understanding of practice. The concept of mushin, no mind, the state in which action arises without the interference of the judging, monitoring, self-watching mind, is the destination that many years of Zen practice are in service of reaching. Not the absence of skill, but the presence of skill so thoroughly embodied that it can express itself without management. In the Zen arts, calligraphy, tea ceremony, archery, flower arrangement, the goal is not technical perfection, but this quality of unmanaged expression. The tea master who performs the ceremony in mushin does not perform it better than the one who manages it carefully. They perform it genuinely, which is different and more than better. Zen teaching also holds that mushin cannot be arrived at by trying to be in mushin. Trying to be without a watching mind is still having a watching mind, the mind that watches whether you are successfully not watching. The only path through is the path the teacher was pointing at. Practice until the skill is embodied, and then release the management, and what arrives is not an absence but a fullness, the full expression of all the practice without the interference of the part of the mind that monitors whether the expression is good enough. The Enso, the Zen circle, is precisely the mark of this quality. A master's circle is not the perfectly controlled circle of someone who has learned to draw circles by careful management. It is the circle of someone who has drawn so many circles that the circle has become natural, and who has learned to step aside when the natural thing is ready to express itself. Think about a skill you have that you most underperform when it matters. Most skills have this quality. They are better in practice than in performance, better when no one is watching than when everyone is, better when the stakes are low than when they are high. The reason is almost always the watching, the additional layer of self-observation that the high-stakes situation adds, which divides the attention and interferes with the embodied skill that the practice has built. The watching is not wrong, it is useful in its place, in early stages of learning where it catches errors that the embodied skill has not yet corrected. But the watching that is appropriate at the beginning of a skill's development becomes the interference at its maturity. This shows up in ordinary life, in the public speaking that falls apart when the speaker is watching themselves, versus the natural conversation that is far more persuasive because the speaker is fully present rather than monitored. In the performance that stumbles when the performer is thinking about the performance versus the flow state when the thinking gives way to the doing. You may have felt this yourself in the specific quality of a moment when you stopped trying, when the effort released and what was underneath it, the actual embodied capacity, suddenly had room to express itself. The run when you stopped thinking about running, the music when you stopped thinking about the notes. Right now, in this breath, there is no skill to manage. The body knows how to sleep, not as a learned technique, but as a natural expression of what a body is. You do not need to direct the descent into rest, only to step aside and let the embodied knowledge of what rest is take you where it always takes you. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote about the healing quality of softness, about the way the soft approach in medicine and in life reaches what the forceful approach cannot. He was not describing weakness or passivity. He was describing the specific wisdom of the healer who knows that the body has its own intelligence, its own direction of recovery, and that the healer's work is to support that direction rather than to substitute their own. The body, like the bamboo, grows in the direction its nature takes it. And the healing that works with this growth, that supports the body's own movement toward recovery, tends to produce outcomes that the healing which overrides the body cannot. Not always. There are moments when the body's own direction is wrong and needs to be corrected. but these moments are less common than the medical impulse toward intervention tends to assume. The Celtic healing traditions understood this intimately. The healer who approaches a body with gentleness and attention, who listens to what the body is doing before deciding what it should do, often finds that the body is already doing the right thing, and that the healer's most important role is to create the conditions in which what the body is already doing can succeed. Softness in healing is not the softness of doing less. It is the softness of doing exactly what is needed, no more and no less, and trusting the body's own intelligence with the rest. There was once a healer who was learning to work with joints. She was apprenticed to a woman who had been treating injuries and ailments in a small community for most of her adult life. The elder healer was known for a particular kind of skill. She could resolve, with what appeared to be very little effort, the kinds of problems that others had tried hard at and made worse. One afternoon, a young man came to them with a shoulder that had come out of its proper position, not completely displaced, but enough to cause pain and significantly restrict movement. He had been in this condition for 2 days and had attempted on his own, with a friend's help, to push it back into place. The attempts had not succeeded. The shoulder now ached, not just from the original injury, but from the subsequent attempts to force it. The elder healer looked at the shoulder. She moved her hands over it slowly, not pressing, just attending. She asked the young man questions about the quality of the pain and the movement that remained. She asked him to let the arm hang fully and rest. Then she did something that the apprentice watched with confusion. She seemed to begin moving the shoulder in the wrong direction, away from where it needed to go, into what looked like a position that would only make things worse. She was not hurrying. Her movements were slow and attentive. Then, with a quality that the apprentice would spend years trying to describe, a quality of completion, as though the last piece of a very large and complex thing had finally settled into its correct place, the shoulder went where it needed to go. The young man made a sound of surprise and relief. He moved the arm. It was restored. The apprentice waited until he had left. "Why did you move it in the wrong direction?" she asked. "I moved it in the direction it was trying to go," the elder said. "The shoulder had a particular quality of tension. It was braced against being pushed toward the correction. The previous attempts to push it had increased that bracing. What I needed to do first was release the bracing, not correct the displacement. And the bracing released when I moved in the direction it was already bracing toward." She paused. "Once the bracing released, the correction was available. It almost made itself. So you were joining the tension before releasing it," the apprentice said. "I was letting the tension complete itself," the elder said. "Tension that has been fighting something cannot be released by the same fighting. It releases when the thing it is fighting against is removed. I removed my resistance to the shoulder's resistance, and in removing that resistance, the shoulder no longer had anything to brace against." The apprentice spent the next several years learning the difference between correcting and releasing, between the healer who pushes toward where the body should be and the healer who creates the conditions in which the body finds its own way back. Most complex injuries and ailments, she discovered, were situations in which the body was already attempting to recover and had become stuck. Not because the recovery direction was wrong, but because something was blocking it. The healer's work was often less about correction and more about the removal of the blockage, the creating of the conditions in which the body's own intelligence could proceed. The elder's hands were the softest she had ever seen on a healer of such capability. Not limp, present, attentive, responsive, but not pressing, never pressing. Celtic healing wisdom holds the body itself as a site of deep intelligence. Intelligence accumulated across the whole of life's experience and expressed in the body's own processes of recovery and repair. The Celtic healer's role in this understanding is first to listen to the body's signals, the quality of pain, the movement that remains and the movement that is blocked, the thing the body is already attempting before the healer arrives. What the body is attempting is not always the right direction of recovery, but it is always worth understanding before correction is applied, because the correction that works with what the body is already doing is far more effective than the correction that overrides it. Celtic tradition also carries a teaching about the healer's own state as a factor in the healing. The healer who approaches with urgency, with the desire to solve quickly, with the internal tension of wanting to produce a result, this healer communicates something to the body they are working with, something the body receives and adds to its own tension. The healer who approaches with genuine quiet, with the patient curiosity of someone who wants to understand before they act, communicates something different. And the body, receiving the quality of presence the healer brings, responds accordingly. There is also in Celtic healing the concept of kaumnu, care, the quality of genuine attending that is different from managing. The healer who cares in this sense is not trying to produce an outcome. They are present with what is there, attending to it fully, and their attending itself is part of the healing. Not as mysticism, but as the practical reality that the body under full, gentle, unhurried attention is in different conditions than the body under efficient, outcome-directed intervention. Think about the ways you treat your own body when it is struggling. Not the obvious care, rest and food and treatment. The quality of attention you bring, the urgency or patience of the way you listen to what the body is telling you, the degree to which you trust the body's own direction of recovery versus substituting your own timeline for the body's. Many of us have learned to approach our own bodies with the same quality we bring to everything else, efficiently, problem-solvingly, with a timeline for resolution. The body is unwell and needs to be fixed. The fixing needs to happen by a certain point. The signals the body is sending are clues to the correct intervention. This is not always wrong, but it often misses what the body is actually doing, which is its own movement toward recovery. A movement that happens best when the conditions for it are provided and the urgency for a particular timeline is released. This shows up in ordinary life in the difference between the rest that is genuinely restorative and the rest that is managed. Managed rest has an agenda. You should be well by Tuesday, you should sleep 8 hours and wake refreshed. The rest you get from managed rest is thinner than the rest that comes when you have genuinely given the body the time it needs without the pressure of an agenda for recovery. You may have felt this yourself in the unexpected recovery, the illness that resolved faster than expected because you stopped managing it and simply rested without a deadline, and the body, in being given genuine rest rather than managed recovery time, found its own pace and took less time than the management had planned. Right now, in this breath, your body is already moving toward its own recovery from this day. The direction is set. The intelligence is present. Your work is only to stop adding your own timeline to what is already underway. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. The Tao Te Ching contains a verse about the leader who governs so lightly that when the work is done, the people say, "We did this ourselves." This is Lao Tzu's teaching on leadership, and it is the bamboo teaching transposed into the human community. The growth that comes from the leader who forces is different in kind from the growth that comes from the leader who creates conditions. The leader who forces may produce impressive results in the short term, the dramatic achievement, the visible change, the outcome delivered on schedule. But the people who produced the outcome did not grow in the producing of it. They were instruments. And instruments do not learn, they are used. The leader who creates conditions, who brings the light and the water and the space and then steps back, produces something slower but more durable. The people do grow. The understanding is genuinely theirs. The capability developed in the doing belongs to them and not to the leader, and it remains in the community when the leader is gone. Ubuntu philosophy holds this teaching at its center. The leader's purpose is not to carry the community toward a destination of their choosing, but to strengthen the community's own capacity to find its way. The leader who strengthens is more needed than the leader who carries. The carrying can only happen while the carrier is present. The strengthening continues long after. There was once a teacher whose students were not learning. She was not a poor teacher. Her knowledge of the subject was genuine, and her explanations were clear and organized. The students were not lazy or disinterested, but something in the dynamic was producing an outcome that troubled her. The students could reproduce what she taught them, but they could not use it. Put them in a new situation that required what they had supposedly learned, and they were uncertain, dependent, waiting to be told what the right application was. She went to an older teacher who had been in the community for many years and whose students were known for a different quality. They seemed genuinely to understand what they had been taught in the way that reveals itself when you ask an unexpected question and they respond with genuine thought rather than recalled information. "What am I missing?" the younger teacher asked. The older teacher asked her to describe a typical lesson. She described it. The introduction of the concept, the worked examples, the questions at the end, and when the students are working on the questions, the older teacher asked, "What are you doing?" "Walking around the room," she said, "available to help. And when a student is stuck, I help them," she said. "I show them where their thinking went wrong or how to approach the next step. And after you show them, they continue, she said. And what have they learned? The older teacher asked. She sat with this, that when they are stuck, she said slowly, I will show them the way. Yes, the older teacher said, which is very kind, and it means they are learning something true, that when they are stuck, help will arrive. But they are not learning how to become unstuck themselves. So I should let them struggle? She asked. I am asking you to wait, the older teacher said. Not forever, but longer than you do. Long enough for the student to discover what they already know about being stuck, which is often more than they think. The discomfort of being stuck is productive discomfort. It is the discomfort of the bamboo growing through the soil. And the bamboo that is never allowed to feel resistance never develops the strength to push through it. The younger teacher tried this. It was very difficult. She could feel the student's discomfort from across the room, and every instinct she had said, "Go help." But she held back, she watched, and she saw things she had not seen before. She saw a student who, when left with a problem long enough, would become still, and then, from that stillness, begin to think in a new direction. She had never seen this particular student go still before. In all the months she had been teaching her, she had never given her long enough in difficulty to discover what the difficulty produced. She saw now that the thinking that arose from that stillness was different from the thinking the student usually did, slower, more deliberate, more genuinely the student's own. She saw another student who, stuck on one approach, would eventually try a completely different one without prompting. Not the approach the young teacher would have suggested. A different one, improvised, lateral, the kind of thinking that only happens when a person cannot fall back on being told what to do and therefore has to reach for what they actually know. She saw the moment when a student who had been uncertain became for the first time genuinely confident, because they had found the way themselves, and finding it themselves meant they actually had it. Not as a piece of received information that might be wrong or might be right, depending on the authority that provided it, as something they had worked through and arrived at, which is a different kind of knowing entirely. The younger teacher felt something shift in her own understanding as she watched. The lesson that followed that first period of holding back was different from any lesson before it. The students asked different questions, not "What do I do?" but "Is this right?" and eventually, "Why does this work?" The second question had never been asked in her class before. It is the question of someone who has arrived at something themselves and is curious about the principle beneath it. It is not a question you can ask about something you were handed. The older teacher had said, when the work is done, let them say they did it themselves. She had thought this was idealistic. She discovered it was practical. Students who believe they found the way themselves seek the next path without waiting to be shown. And the capability that developed in the finding, the specific kind of resilience that comes from having navigated real difficulty without rescue, is a different resource than anything she had been teaching. She had been teaching content. She had not been teaching the students to trust their own minds. She returned to the older teacher at the end of that week with a new question. "How long did it take you to learn this?" she asked. The older teacher considered. "Longer than it should have," she said. "I was very good at teaching, It took me a while to understand that what I was good at was getting in the way. Ubuntu philosophy holds at its center the understanding that genuine learning, the kind that becomes part of a person and changes how they move through the world, can only arise from within the learner. It cannot be installed from without. The Ubuntu teaching on ukuzifunda, self-learning, the discovery that comes from genuine engagement with a problem, holds that the teacher's most important role is not the transfer of knowledge, but the creation of the conditions in which the student's own learning becomes possible. These conditions include challenge, the right kind of difficulty, the space in which confusion is allowed to exist without being immediately resolved. Ubuntu also carries the teaching that genuine capability, the kind that belongs to a community and not just to an individual, grows when each person in the community is given the opportunity to develop their own genuine understanding. The community that depends on the knowledge of one person is vulnerable to the loss of that person. The community in which each person has developed their own genuine understanding is strengthened by every member's growth. The younger teacher's error was a form of caring that undermined this genuine capability. By rescuing her students from productive discomfort, she was keeping the knowledge in herself. Her students were dependent on her presence because she had not yet learned to give the struggle its proper time. The older teacher's gift was the specific teaching that the younger teacher could not, at first, receive as abstract principle, but had to discover in practice. The bamboo needs the soil's resistance to grow strong. The student needs the struggle's resistance for the same reason. Removing the resistance removes the growing. Think about someone you care about, that you have been helping more than their growth requires. A child, a student, a colleague, a friend, someone whose struggle you have been rescuing them from out of genuine care, because their struggle is uncomfortable to witness, because you have the knowledge that would resolve it quickly, because helping feels like the loving response. But consider what the rescue has taught them, that when stuck, help will arrive, which is true and comforting, and which also means they have not yet had the experience of becoming unstuck themselves, which is the only experience that would teach them they can. This shows up in ordinary life, in the specific dynamic of the capable parent whose child cannot manage without them, not because the child lacks capability, but because the capability has never been needed. The capability develops when it is needed. It does not develop in the presence of a reliable rescue. You may have felt this yourself in the memory of something you had to figure out alone, without the teacher, without the guide, without the person who could have told you what to do, and the quality of understanding you developed in that figuring out. Not just the fact of the solution, but the confidence that came from knowing you had arrived at it yourself. Right now, in this breath, no rescue is needed. The body is doing what it knows how to do, in the quiet of its own capability. You have done the day. What comes now comes from the body's own wisdom, the growth that happens in the dark, unhurried, unrescued. Let it proceed. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu wrote about the quality he called jian, frugality, sometimes translated as simplicity or thriftiness. He held it as one of the three treasures, alongside compassion and the willingness not to contend, that the sage cultivates. And jian in Lao Tzu's sense is not stinginess. It is the quality of using exactly what is needed and not more. The bamboo uses exactly what it needs. It does not draw more water than its growth requires. It does not produce more growth than the season can support. It is precise in the way that living things are precise when they are genuinely healthy, taking what serves the growing and leaving what does not. This teaching connects to the theme of softness in a specific way. The soft approach uses less, not because it is less effective, but because it wastes nothing on fighting resistance. The tight-handed grip uses more energy than the soft-handed touch. For the same or lesser result, the excess energy goes into the grip itself, not into the work. For the Polynesian plait maker, this teaching is entirely practical. The plait that is too tight splits. The plait that is made with the right tension, firm enough to hold its structure, relaxed enough to flex, is both more durable and more beautiful. The excess of tension is not a sign of strength, it is a sign of misunderstanding what the strength is for. There was once a young woman learning to plait. She came from a tradition where plaiting was not merely a practical skill, but a meaningful one. The patterns carried information. The quality of the work spoke of the maker's relationship to the tradition, and a well-made piece was understood as both a functional object and an expression of genuine understanding. She was apprenticed to an elder whose plating was so fine that people travelled some distance to see her work. The elder moved slowly and spoke little, but when she did speak, it was always specific and always worth holding. The young woman's early attempts were tight. She felt the tightness was a virtue. The plate was firm and organized and did not slip or shift as she worked. When she showed her work to the elder pressed the plate gently between her fingers. "Make another section," the elder said, "but this time imagine you are weaving water." The young woman did not know what this meant. "Water does not stop moving," the elder said. "It is always in motion. Weave the strands as though they are water, as though they want to flow past each other, and you are simply guiding the flow, not locking it." She tried. The new section felt entirely different as she made it, less controlled, more like something she was following than making. "Good," the elder said. "Now press both sections." The young woman pressed the tight section. It was firm under her fingers, but did not move. She pressed the newer section. It yielded slightly to the pressure, and then returned to its shape. "Which will last longer?" the elder asked. She thought about it. She had assumed the tighter one. It seemed stronger, the one that gives, the elder said. "The one that is too tight has no room to move when it is asked to move. When that moment comes, and it always comes, the strand that cannot give will break. The strand that can give will bend and recover." She looked at the young woman. "The strength of the plait is not in how firmly it is held together. It is in how well it can move without losing its structure." The young woman worked on this distinction for the rest of the season. What she discovered was that the quality of weaving water produced not only more durable plaits, but more even ones, because her hands, not gripping, were more responsive to the subtle variations in the strand's own tension and quality. The grip had been overriding information she could have used. The openness received it. She also found, to her surprise, that the work was less tiring, not because she was doing less, she was making more pieces in a day than before, but because the effort was efficient. Nothing was going into the grip that was not needed for the guiding. This is true of most things, the elder said when the young woman mentioned this. The excess of effort is always more tiring than the effort itself. When you use what is needed and not more, the doing lasts longer and goes further. This is what the tradition means when it says that the best work looks effortless. It is not effortless. It is exactly as effortful as it needs to be, and exactly as effortful as it needs to be feels like less than you expected. Polynesian craft traditions, including the plaiting and weaving traditions of many Pacific Island cultures, carry a deep understanding of the relationship between the maker's body, the material, and the quality of the finished work. The Polynesian understanding of craft as a living dialogue between maker and material is relevant here. The plait maker does not impose a structure on the strands. She reads the strand's own qualities and creates the structure that the strands, at their best, are capable of holding. Strands that are drier require slightly more give. Strands that are fresh need less. The skilled maker adjusts constantly, not through mechanical calculation, but through the bodily attentiveness that comes from years of practice. There is also in Polynesian craft tradition the concept of mana, the spiritual power or authority that flows through skilled making. A piece made with genuine skill and appropriate effort carries mana. A piece made with excessive effort, where the maker's force has been imposed on the material rather than the maker's skill working with it, is often said to lack mana, regardless of its technical correctness. The mana comes from the quality of the relationship between maker and material, which is a quality of responsiveness rather than control. The elder's teaching, weave as though the strands are water, is the teaching of responsive relationship. The strands have their own qualities, their own tendencies, their own direction of flow. The maker who reads this flow and guides it, rather than overriding it with grip, produces the work that lasts and that carries within it the quality of the relationship from which it was made. Think about where in your life you are using the tight plait when the water plait would serve better. The hold that is firmer than the situation requires. The schedule maintained at greater cost than the scheduling is worth. The relationship managed at a level of attention that leaves no room for the relationship itself to move and breathe and find its own direction. The tight grip in all of these is not wrong in intention. It comes from caring, from responsibility, from the genuine desire to produce something durable. But the durability of things held too tightly is actually less than the durability of things held with the right amount of firmness and the right amount of give. This shows up in ordinary life in the calendar so tightly scheduled that there is no room for what the day actually needs, and the exhaustion that comes from maintaining the tight schedule against the reality of what is actually arising. And in the alternative, The calendar that has enough give in it that when the unexpected arrives, it can be met without the whole structure cracking. You may have felt this yourself in the specific tiredness of a day when everything was held too tightly, and the specific ease of a day when you had given yourself room to respond to what the day was actually bringing, rather than maintaining the tight plait of what the day was supposed to bring. Right now, in this breath, the weaving of tonight requires only the water grip. The strands are ready to flow into their natural positions. You do not need to hold the night together. The night holds itself. Let your hands open. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu taught that the Tao is found in the deep places, not in the dramatic heights where things are visible and celebrated, but in the low places, the quiet places, the underground places where the work that makes everything else possible happens without being seen. The bamboo's growth begins underground. Long before there is any visible sign of what is happening, the root system of a bamboo plant spreads through the soil in every direction, preparing the ground, building the network, establishing the foundation from which the visible growth will eventually emerge. The dramatic upward thrust of the new shoot, when it finally appears, is the culmination of a long, invisible process. The growth was happening the whole time. It simply was not yet visible. For the Aboriginal Australian traditions, this understanding of the underground work, the work that precedes visibility, the work that cannot be observed, but that makes all the visible work possible, is embedded in the relationship to country itself. Underground water is found not by digging randomly, but by reading the surface signs that indicate where the underground life is moving. The water does not announce itself. It does the quiet work of nourishing everything above it without ever being seen. The teaching here is about the value of the invisible work, the inner preparation, the root spreading, the cultivation of conditions that will eventually produce visible growth, and about the patience required to do this work without the reassurance of visible results. There was once a young person learning to follow water underground. In the dry country where they lived, finding water was not always a matter of going to a known source. Sometimes the known sources dried. Sometimes the group travelled into territory where the sources were not yet known. And in those situations, the skill of reading the land for the signs of underground water was not an interesting capability. It was a necessary one. The elder who was teaching them was a man who had been weeding dry country for many decades. He moved through landscape in a way that was difficult to describe from the outside. He seemed unhurried and unremarkable, taking in everything without appearing to focus on any particular thing, and then with no visible drama indicating there. The young person wanted to understand what he was seeing. "What do you look at?" they asked early in the first day. "Everything," the elder said. "Nothing in particular. All of it at once." This was not a satisfying answer. The young person tried to copy the quality of the looking, the broad, unfocused attention that seemed to take in the whole landscape without settling on any part of it. "Now you are looking at how I look. the elder said without turning. Look at the land. They tried again. The land under broad attention was just the land. Dry, flat, the same in every direction as far as they could tell. What grows here? The elder asked. They described what they could see. Scattered low shrubs, occasional grasses. And over there? He indicated a direction. The vegetation was slightly different there, the same general type, but with a quality that the young person, looking carefully for the first time, could see was different. Not greener exactly, more settled, as though the plants there had access to something the plants elsewhere did not. Yes, the elder said. Is that where the water is? That is where to look, the elder said. The land is not telling you that there is water there. It is telling you that something there is better for plants than what is around it. Water is one reason a place might be better for plants. It is the most likely reason in dry country. He paused. The reading is not a conclusion. The reading is a direction. They walked to the place. Closer up, other things became visible. The slightly different texture of the soil, the way the ground had a very subtle slope that drained toward this point, the evidence that animals had also found this place worth visiting. How do you find the water itself? The young person asked. You go softly, the elder said. You go softly and you attend. You do not dig until you have attended long enough to feel confident. He looked at the ground. Digging is loud. The soft approach first, then the soft digging. The water is very patient. It will still be there if you take the time to understand where it is before you start making marks in the earth. They dug gently in the place the elder indicated and found the water at a depth that the young person would not have expected, would not have reached if they had been digging hard and fast and stopped when it seemed like nothing was there. How deep did you know it would be? The young person asked. I did not know, the elder said. I thought it likely to be there. And when I thought likely, I went softly enough to find out. The young person spent many more seasons learning to read the land this way, not as a set of rules about what each sign meant, but as a quality of attention that remained genuinely open to what the land was actually offering, rather than what a rule said it should be offering. Aboriginal Australian knowledge traditions carry a profound and specific understanding of the relationship between surface and depth, between what is visible and what sustains the visible, between the life above the earth and the life below it. The concept of reading country, dadiri, deep listening, extends in many Aboriginal traditions to the reading of underground systems. Water, minerals, the root networks of ancient trees, the living systems that move through the soil, all of these are understood as communicating something readable at the surface for those with the attention and the patience to receive the communication. The Aboriginal Australian understanding of time is relevant here. The shallow time of what is currently visible is understood as resting on the deep time of what has always been here. The geological, the ancestral, the song line that maps a territory across tens of thousands of years. Reading the surface requires awareness of the deep time that shaped it. The dry riverbed is not merely dry, it is the record of water that was here, the promise of water that will return, the living memory of the land's relationship with water over an immense span of time. This long-time awareness produces a different quality of reading than the immediate attention to what is currently visible. The experienced reader of country does not see only what is here now. They see the layers, what was, what will likely be, what the surface is telling them about what lies beneath it, both in space and in time. The young person's lesson, go softly, attend before digging, is this reading in its most practical form. The soft approach to the unknown keeps the observer in the posture of learning. The hard, fast approach to the unknown presupposes what is there before the attending has confirmed it, and in presupposing often misses or destroys what was actually present. Think about the places in your life where you are digging hard and fast and stopping when it seems like nothing is there. The relationship you gave up on before the deeper layer became accessible, the creative project you abandoned before the underground work had finished producing what the surface would eventually show, the practice you stopped before the invisible roots had spread far enough to support the visible growth that was coming. The bamboo's most dramatic-looking growth, the new shoot emerging suddenly from what appeared to be bare ground, is the culmination of years of invisible root spreading. To look at the bare ground and conclude that nothing is happening is to misread what is actually occurring. This shows up in ordinary life in the specific discouragement of effort that is not yet producing visible results. The diet that has not yet shown itself in the mirror, the skill that has not yet produced work you are proud of, the relationship that has not yet reached the depth you are hoping for, the practice that has been faithful but has not yet delivered the peace it seemed to promise. In all of these, the underground work may be happening at full speed, entirely invisible, preparing the ground for growth that has not yet emerged. The question is whether you continue, gently, consistently, without the assurance of visible proof, or whether you dig hard and fast and stop when it seems like nothing is there. Right now, in this breath, the underground work of this night has already begun. Not the dramatic rest, the invisible preparation for tomorrow, the restoration of what the day used, the spreading of the roots. All of this is already underway, in the dark, without your management of it, doing what it has always done. Let it work in peace. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now, not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu taught about what he called day, the virtue or power that expresses itself naturally from genuine alignment with the Tao. The sage's de is not an effort, it is an expression, the natural outflow of a life lived in genuine relationship with the way things actually are. The gardener who works with the soil's nature rather than against it is expressing their own version of this de, not through virtue in the moral sense, but through the practical alignment of their approach with what the growing things actually require. This alignment produces results that the forcing approach cannot, because the force cannot produce what only the genuine conditions can produce. The Mayan agricultural traditions understood the relationship between the gardener and the soil as a living relationship between two presences, each with its own intelligence and its own contribution to what the field produces. The gardener's role was not to impose fertility on the soil, but to create and maintain the conditions in which the soil's own fertility could express itself, to nourish the soil so that the soil could nourish the plant. This is the bamboo teaching in its agricultural form. You cannot force a plant to grow. You can provide the conditions, light, water, the right relationship between the roots and the earth. And in those conditions, the plant does what plants do, which is grow continuously in the direction its nature takes it, and eventually produce what only growing things can produce. There was once a gardener who grew the finest maize in a poor year. The year had been difficult. The rains had come late and then too abundantly, and then not at all, and most of the fields in the region had produced disappointing yields. The maize that did survive was small and the harvest was thin. But one gardener's field had produced maize that was, by comparison, remarkable. The stalks were strong, the ears were full, and the yield was considerably better than anything else in the surrounding area. Her neighbors came to ask what she had done. She was a small, unhurried woman who had been working this particular piece of land for many decades. She listened to their questions and seemed to consider how to answer them. "I did not grow the maize," she said finally. They looked at each other. "I tended the soil," she said. "The maize grew itself." "But in a year like this," one of the neighbors said, "what did you do differently?" She took them to the field. She showed them the soil, the particular dark quality of it, the way it held moisture differently from the soil in the surrounding fields. "The soil knows what to do with water when it arrives," she said. "The question is whether the soil is in condition to do it. My soil has been in preparation for this kind of year for a long time." "How do you prepare soil for a difficult year?" one of the neighbors asked. She thought about how to explain. "You do not prepare it for a difficult year specifically," she said. "You prepare it for the long relationship with rain and drought and heat and cold, which is every year eventually. You build into the soil the capacity to hold what it receives, to release it slowly, to keep the roots of the plants fed during the dry times." She crouched down and took a handful of the soil. "This soil has been receiving organic matter for many years. It has been allowed to rest between growing seasons. It has not been worked when it was wet, which would have destroyed its structure. These are not preparations for difficulty. They are what it means to treat soil well." One of the neighbors said, "We work our fields hard." "Yes," she said, without judgment. "Working the soil hard is not the same as working it well. The hard work often damages what the soil has been building over a long time." She set down the handful of soil. "In a good year, many methods produce acceptable results. The year shows you what you have been doing. A difficult year shows you what you have been doing for a long time." She did not frame this as criticism. She answered their questions honestly and showed them what she had done and why, and she offered to spend time with any of them who wanted to begin. One neighbor asked the question she had been expecting, "How long will it take?" She considered it carefully before answering. "The first change you will see," she said, "is in how the soil feels under your hands when you work it. It will become different, more alive, more giving. That takes perhaps 2 seasons of consistent care." She paused. "The change in the yield takes longer. You will not see what I have in this field for several years, and you will not see it most dramatically until the next difficult year." The neighbor looked discouraged. "I know," she said. "It is a long time to work without seeing the result you are working toward. But think about what you are doing during those years. You are building something that no single season's work can build. The soil is accumulating what it has been given. It does not lose it between seasons. It holds what you bring to it, adds it to what was already there, and becomes, year by year, the soil that produces what you are hoping for." She picked up a handful of her own dark earth again, let it fall through her fingers. The work and the result are not on the same schedule. This is not a reason not to begin. It is the reason to begin today. Some of them began. None of them saw the results quickly. Soil improvement is itself a long process, requiring several seasons before the change becomes visible in the yield. But the ones who began, and who maintained the beginning, eventually had the same quality of field that she had. Not the field that produced the best yield in a good year, but the field that produced a yield in every year, including the difficult ones. Mayan agricultural traditions are among the most sophisticated the world has produced, built on an understanding of the relationship between soil, water, plant, and human attention that was developed over many centuries of careful observation. The Mayan milpa system, the traditional method of cultivating maize, beans, and squash together in a mutually supportive relationship, is a practical embodiment of the Taoist teaching. Not the imposition of a design on the land, but the creation of conditions in which the land's own fertility can express itself. The three plants support each other. The maize provides structure for the beans to climb, the beans fix nitrogen that enriches the soil for the maize and squash, the squash's broad leaves shade the soil and retain moisture. This is not a mechanical system. It is a living relationship, and Mayan farmers understood it as such. The soil was not a substrate to be managed, but a living presence to be nourished. The decisions about planting, when, what, how close, in what rotation, were informed by the farmer's ongoing observation of what the soil and the plants were actually communicating about their needs. Mayan cosmological thinking also carried the understanding that the fertility of the field was connected to the quality of the farmer's relationship with the land and with the larger cycles of which the farm was a part. The farmer who tended the soil with genuine attention and care was in relationship with something larger than themselves. The yield was not only the product of technique, but of the quality of the relationship the technique expressed. The gardener's teaching, that difficult years show you what you have been doing for a long time, is this Mayan understanding in its most practical form. The soil that has been genuinely tended produces yield in difficult years. The soil that has been used reveals the cost of what it has been put through when the conditions are not generous. Think about something in your life that you have been working hard at without necessarily working well at. Not something you are failing at, something you are maintaining, even succeeding at in good conditions. But that has not yet been tested by difficult conditions, or that has been tested and shown something about the soil you have been building. The gardener's teaching is not about failure. It is about what we have been doing for a long time, beneath the surface of the obvious effort. The soil that is actually being built by the patient, consistent, unglamorous care is the soil that will hold when the difficult year comes. This shows up in ordinary life in the relationship that has been genuinely tended, not perfectly, but consistently with real attention to the other person's needs, versus the relationship that has been maintained for appearance without the genuine attention. The first weathers difficulty in ways the second does not. You may have felt this yourself in a season when something you had been quietly, consistently tending, a skill, a relationship, a practice, a particular quality of attention to your own inner life, suddenly became visible as actually having developed, usually in a moment when you needed it, and it was there. Right now, in this breath, the long tending of your life continues. Not the dramatic visible parts, those rest in sleep, the quiet underground parts, the way the body rebuilds in the night, the way the mind processes in the dream, the long, slow nourishment of the rest that may not be visible in the morning, but that is genuinely happening in the dark. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Lao Tzu ended the Tao Te with a teaching about the nature of genuine strength. The wise person does not contend, and therefore no one can contend with them. They do not compete, and therefore the competition cannot touch them. They give themselves fully and are enriched by the giving. This is the bamboo's final lesson. The bamboo does not compete with the soil. It grows through the soil. And in growing through it, it changes the soil, aerates it, provides it with organic material, creates channels through which water will flow more freely. The bamboo does not intend this gift. It simply grows, and the growing is a gift to everything around it. The Norse understanding of weird, of fate and the woven quality of life carries something of this final teaching. The rune carver who carves too hard splits the wood. The rune carver who carves with the right lightness goes deeper and does no damage. The mark is more permanent precisely because it was made with less force. Softness is not the absence of strength. It is strength that has stopped fighting, that has found the form most suited to what the work actually requires. The bamboo is not weak. It is the most persistent, most enduring, most ultimately capable thing in the field. It is still growing when the hard things have long since broken. Tonight we end where we began, at the bamboo shoot, pushing softly through what seemed impossible, one increment of growth at a time, arriving eventually not because it was the strongest, but because it never stopped. There was once a young person learning to carve runes into wood. This was not casual decoration. In the tradition they had been born into, the runes were living marks, letters that carried meaning and power, and the carving of them was considered a practice that required both skill and a quality of attention that the tradition called seda. The right kind of seeing, the kind that perceives what a thing actually is, rather than what it appears to be. The young person was eager and strong-handed, and the eagerness and the strong hands conspired in the early stages of their practice to produce carving that was aggressive, the tool driven into the wood with more force than the wood required, the strokes longer and deeper than the letters called for. Some of the early pieces cracked, others held, but with a quality of forced labor that was visible to anyone who looked. An elder who had been carving since long before the young person was born watched this for some time before speaking. One afternoon, she brought 2 pieces of finished work and held them up. "Which of these has more force in it?" she asked. The young person looked at them. One was the elder's own work. The runes were deep and clean and had a quality that was hard to name but unmistakable. They looked as though they had always been there, as though the wood had wanted them. The other was a piece by a different hand, technically competent, the marks clear and correct, but somehow labored, carrying within them the record of the effort it had taken to place them. "The other one," the young person said. "Yes," the elder said. "And which will last longer?" They had both been told, in the early instruction, that the deepest marks were the most durable. The young person looked at the 2 pieces again. "Yours?" they said slowly. "Not because of depth," the elder said, "because the wood has not been damaged. The mark that is placed with too much force damages the wood around it. The fibers compress in ways they were not meant to compress. The structure of the wood is disrupted along the path of the mark. In time, this damage expresses itself as splitting, as weakness, as the very things the depth of the carving was supposed to prevent." She set both pieces down. "The lightest cut that goes deep enough goes deeper in the long run than the deepest cut that goes too deep." "How do I know when it is deep enough?" the young person asked. "The wood tells you," she said. "When the tool is moving at the right pressure, the cutting feels easy. There is a quality of rightness to it, a sense that the tool and the wood are in agreement. When you are pressing past what the wood wants to give, you feel resistance. Not the resistance of hard wood, the resistance of wood being asked for more than it wants to give." The young person tried this in the next session. The quality of listening for agreement rather than pressing for depth changed everything. The pace of the work, the quality of the marks, the whole relationship between hand and material. Marks that had previously required several strokes to achieve now arrived in one. The wood had not changed. The asking had but something else changed too, which was harder to name. When the young person had been pressing hard, all the attention had been on whether the mark was deep enough, correct enough, in the right place. In that state, each mark was evaluated before it was complete, and the evaluation kept interfering with the completion. When the pressing softened and the listening began, the attention shifted. It moved off the evaluation of the mark and onto the quality of the relationship with the wood. The wood's grain, its density here and its openness there, the small variations in its surface that a softer tool reveals. In attending to this, the young person was simultaneously learning the wood, not as an abstraction, but as this particular piece of wood with its own history and its own qualities, and the marks, no longer managed, arrived at the right depth, because the whole attention was on understanding what the right depth was. This was, the elder said when the young person described it, how the rune makers learned to read what was already there before making their mark. The rune exists before the carving, the elder said. The carving reveals it. The carver who presses is not revealing. They are imposing. What arrives from imposing is technically correct, but does not carry what it should carry. She ran her fingers along the young person's new work, feeling rather than looking. This one carries what it should carry. It has the quality of something found, not made. The rune that is carved with agreement, the elder said, carries the agreement in it. The rune that is forced carries the forcing. Anyone who knows how to look can read both. The meaning is the same, but only one of them has the quality of truth. Norse runic tradition carries a teaching about the relationship between the rune maker and the mark that connects directly to the bamboo's teaching. The mark that is made in agreement with the material carries something the forced mark cannot. The Norse understanding of runes was not merely symbolic. The runes were understood as living forces, aspects of a reality that existed independent of any particular mark, which the carver's work made accessible and focused. The carver who carved with the right quality of attention was not creating the rune's power. They were providing the channel through which the rune's inherent power could flow. The carver who carved with force was imposing something rather than receiving something. The concept of Seder, the right quality of seeing and knowing that made effective runic work possible, is related to the broader Norse understanding of wisdom as a quality of perception rather than of force. Odin's acquisition of runic knowledge involved hanging for 9 days from Yggdrasil, not fighting for the runes, but suffering, waiting, becoming empty enough to receive what the runes had to offer. The knowledge did not come through force. It came through a quality of sustained, open, costly endurance. The bamboo's patience in extreme form. Norse tradition also carries the teaching that the quality of a thing, a sword, a ship, a piece of craftsmanship, is partly determined by the quality of the maker's state while making it. Not as mysticism, but as the practical reality that attentive, unhurried, agreed-upon making produces different results from distracted, hurried, forced making in ways that show in the finished work and affect its usefulness over time. The elders' teaching, the lightest cup that goes deep enough, is this tradition's version of the bamboo's lesson. Not the most force, but the right force. Softness is not the absence of the cut. It is the cut that the wood was willing to receive. Think about the marks you have made in the world with more force than the material required. The conversation that was pressed past what the other person could receive, the decision that was made faster than the situation was ready to support, the change that was implemented with such urgency that it damaged the fabric it was supposed to improve, the work that was done at such a pace that the quality of the doing is not something you can be proud of, even if the thing got done. These are the forced carvings, the marks that carry the forcing in them, visible to anyone who knows how to look, including you. And think about the marks you have made with just enough force. The conversation held with genuine patience, where what arrived surprised you with its depth. The decision given the time it needed, which arrived clear and stayed clear. The work done at the pace the work itself required, which produced something that has your own quality in it, not your urgency, but your actual care. This shows up in ordinary life in the difference between the things you did with your whole attention and the things you did while managing other demands. The first kind tends to last. The second kind tends to need to be done again. You may have felt this yourself in the specific satisfaction of work that had your whole presence in it, not your maximum effort, but your genuine attention. The mark was right, not because you forced it, because you listened until you knew what was needed, and then you provided exactly that. Right now, in this breath, the carving is done for today. Whatever marks you made, they are made. What comes now is the elder's part, the quiet in which the wood settles around the marks, in which what has been placed has time to become what it was always becoming. Let the night have this time. The marks will be there in the morning. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a breath. Notice how you are feeling right now. Not how you think you should feel, just how you actually feel. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Tonight we began with a bamboo shoot, pushing softly through hard, compacted earth, not by force, but by the patient, continuous expression of its own nature. Through 13 chapters, we watched that single image open into many forms. We sat with a young mystic who was searching with a fist when only an open hand could receive what she was looking for. We watched a leather worker discover that the tight grip produces uneven work, and that the soft grip paradoxically sees more and does more and produces better results. We accompanied a young student who could not move a difficult teacher through argument, and who discovered that the question the teacher had not been asked could reach where every argument had failed. We sat with a student of the loom learning to tend conditions rather than control thread, and learned with her that tending and controlling are opposite approaches that produce opposite results. We spent time with a novice who was pressing at understanding rather than planting it, and who discovered that what grows in the quiet after the pressing cannot be hurried into arriving earlier. We watched a young man learn that genuine presence held patiently over time opens what no single act of persuasion can. We followed a calligrapher's student learning to step aside so the skill could express itself without management. We sat with a healer learning that the shoulder that has been bracing releases only when the resistance to its bracing is removed. We watched a young teacher hold back the rescue and discover that her students had more capability than she had given them the opportunity to discover. We accompanied a plait maker learning to weave as though the strands are water. We followed a young person learning to find underground water by going softly rather than digging hard. We walked with a gardener whose soil had been quietly prepared for the difficult year long before the difficult year came. And we ended with a rune carver learning that the lightest cut that goes deep enough lasts longer than the deepest cut that goes too deep. All of these are the bamboo. All of them are the same teaching approached from a different direction, that what continues softly and consistently goes further, lasts longer, and produces more than what forces itself into results. That the strength of softness is not the absence of power, but the presence of a power that the hard thing cannot access. The power of what does not exhaust itself in resistance, and therefore is still here when the resistance has passed. This teaching is not easy. We live in a world that admires the tree, that celebrates the dramatic result, the quick victory, the visible force that produces visible change. The bamboo's teaching is invisible for a long time. The underground work does not announce itself. The continuing that never stops is not as exciting as the burst of force. But consider, we remember the bamboo because it is still here. The dramatic events that seemed so much more significant, the cracking of the frozen ground, the sudden collapse of what had been rigid, those are stories that ended. The bamboo's story has not ended. It is still growing. In the dark, right now, somewhere, a bamboo shoot is finding its way through what seemed impenetrable yesterday, one increment at a time, without drama, without announcement, simply continuing. This is the quality of strength that Lodge was pointing at, not the strength that wins, but the strength that does not stop. The strength that has stopped fighting itself, stopped exhausting itself against the resistance, and simply grows in the direction it was always growing, until what seemed impossible has quietly already happened. But the bamboo is still here. The tree that could not bend is not. You do not need to remember everything you heard tonight. If one image stayed with you, the open hand, the water plat, the lightest cut that goes deep enough, let that be enough. The understanding that has genuinely taken root does not need to be held. It grows on its own, in the dark, in the quiet, in exactly the way it was always going to grow. Wherever you are right now, you are welcome here, exactly as you are. With whatever you have been pressing at today, and whatever you are ready now to set down, the bamboo does not press, it simply continues. Tonight, that is enough. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at the Tao at Night.